Okay, for starters, that is so misleading. It's not even funny. So in Texas, in 2011, there were 73,200 abortions, and in 2017, there were 55,000 abortions. That is a dramatic decrease. You know how many abortions were in Delaware? 2,900. And then the year after that, there was 2,800. A 38% decrease there is not that much at all. Hello, my friends. Today we are going to be looking at this video that Vischer just posted. It's called What About Abortion? Should this one issue determine how Christians vote? Vischer, of course, created VeggieTales, very, very liberal, progressive Christian. So I can only assume that he's saying, yeah, vote Democrat because abortion isn't that important. But that's just a guess. I haven't watched it yet, so let's get into it.
I was in high school in the early 1980s when evangelical Christians first started focusing on abortion. And the one thing we all agreed on was that overturning Roe versus Wade was the key to reducing abortion in America. 40 years later, we still haven't overturned Roe. Today, some pro-life evangelical Christians are asking whether this is still the right focus of so much of our attention. Is overturning Roe the key to reducing abortion? Our friend David French made an argument that really got us thinking. And when my podcast co-host, Sky Jitani, echoed that argument on Twitter, people said, hey, you should make a video about that. So, we did. Here's my buddy Sky trying to answer the question, is overturning Roe versus Wade the key to reducing abortion in America? And if it isn't, what is? It's okay if you disagree, but it's worth having the conversation.
Okay. Well, I don't know why he's looking at the camera like that. Because I don't. Well, first off, it's not worth having the conversation over. The only conversation worth having over something like abortion is what exactly is abortion and how does the Bible define such actions? Well, I know that abortion is murder because life begins at conception. And the Bible says, whether you like it or not, that anyone who murders someone should be put to death. That is clearly in the Bible. Maybe you don't want to take it that far, but at least you can agree that it's bad. You don't have to go necessarily that far, but you need to agree. So the way he's framing this question is that Roe v. Wade would be the end all of abortion, and no one who's arguing against or for Roe v. Wade, well, the people arguing for Roe v. Wade like to say that it's the end of abortion, but no one arguing against Roe v. Wade is saying that. They're saying that it's a state's rights, and so a state who wants to have it will have it. A state who doesn't want to have it, they will not have it. So no, I don't think a conversation the way this is framed is worth having.
Okay, here it is.
For almost 50 years, Christians have been told that who you support for president will either save or sacrifice the lives of unborn babies. This has led a lot of pro-life Christians to become single-issue voters.
So I don't think anyone's arguing that. I think people are they don't like abortion and they won't support anyone who does. And every little thing that you can do to stop an injustice should be done. So I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden because he is very pro-abortion, allegedly Catholic, even though the Catholic Church is outright against it. Him and Kamala actually are both Catholic and they support abortion, which does not make sense to me. The Catholic Church should really get on excommunicating people. But let's continue.
Willing to overlook everything else about a candidate as long as they're against abortion. When a candidate's bad character or unchristian policies are brought up, the response is often, yeah, but abortion.
Okay, well, for starters, what defines an unchristian policy? Welfare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those are not, while they can be beneficial and you can argue for that, that does not make them Christian policies. The only abortion would be a Christian policy because it goes directly against your beliefs. welfare is not a Christian policy, because that's what he's getting at. He's like, well, I don't think you're doing enough for the poor. Someone actually told me that the other day. They're like, if you're a Republican, I don't think you're doing anything for the poor. I'm sorry, what? Absolutely not. I think it's lazy to put that stuff on the government, but that's beside the point. This is a Christian argument. So if someone's against this and they say that, and he's giving this argument, like, it literally doesn't make any sense. I don't think I'm going to make it through this whole video because we're only at 1 minute, and so far I've done 5 minutes.
The argument looks something like this. My vote determines the president nominates justices to the Supreme Court can overturn Roe v. Wade, and overturning Roe will make abortion illegal and save babies.
Okay, well, that's not true. It would just put it back to the states, where it should be. Federal government should not be the end-all be-all of all things. So right now their premise is already wrong and really deceitful.
Let's unpack what's wrong with this argument and why your vote for president might not impact abortion the way you think. Let's look at 3 common assumptions. Number 1, a Republican president will appoint pro-life justices to this.
So right off the bat, you can tell that this is just, please vote Democrat. Please vote Democrat. It's okay, even though on their platform they promote abortion. It's okay.
Supreme Court to end abortion.
You don't need to feel guilty.
Since the Roe
for
decision in
supporting
1973, Republican presidents have appointed 11 justices to the Supreme Court, and very soon it could be 12. Democratic presidents have only appointed 4. For 49 of the last 50 years, Republicans have held the majority on the Supreme Court. Despite this Republican domination of the court for 5 decades, it hasn't overturned Roe. For example,
So here's a common misconception. The Supreme Court doesn't just go out of their way and look at laws and be like, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to strike this law down. They can't, because unless there's a case that comes up before them, they can't do anything about it. Not that they should be making laws from the bench anyway. That's another problem that they have. Say what you want about gay marriage. That was not something that they should have done. The legal thing to do in that situation was to get rid of marriage laws in general, not redefine marriage laws, because now that just starts a whole snowball. It keeps going down the path. There are some people, advocates, even politicians, who want polygamy open, and they're advocating for the marriage age to go back down. Just absolutely disgusting stuff.
in 1992, Republicans had an 8-1 majority on the Supreme Court. 5 of those 8 Republican justices had been appointed by Reagan or Bush, both stridently pro-life presidents. And that one Democratic justice on the court, Byron White, he voted against Roe in 1973. But when a case came before the court that year which could have
So basically what he's saying there is that, oh, you need to vote Democrat because this one Democrat who's been alive since, I don't know, well, way before Roe v. Wade was even a thing, back when there was a large number of Democrats who were against abortion, voted against it. Slick.
overturned Roe, the Republican appointed justices.
And so what he just did there was he said, also, that picture would not be, anyway, he said that a case needed to come up, and so there's only been one case before the Supreme Court, and they've just refused to see any other cases.
Didn't do it. Instead, they reaffirmed the right to an abortion. And even as recently as 2020, a Louisiana law restricting abortion was struck down by Chief Justice John Roberts, who was appointed by George W. Bush. And
Just anti-Republican nonsense.
here's the important part. In his ruling, Roberts cited the legal principle of stare decisis. That's the belief that the court should abide by its previous rulings. So for decades, the Republican-dominated Supreme Court has only reaffirmed, rather than reversed, Roe v. Wade. And if Chief Justice Roberts says the court should abide by its previous rulings, It's looking less and less likely that the court will ever overturn Roe.
Well, you're mistaking John Roberts to being a conservative. He is an absolute garbage, like legit garbage person. Like he's not a good justice. No one's ever thought he's a good justice. You even have Donald Trump slamming him all the time, even before he was put in office. You have Lindsey Graham, who voted to affirm him, coming out against him all the time. He is not a good justice.
No matter how many conservatives are on it. That's why David French, a civil liberties lawyer and strong pro-life conservative, says this: for almost 3 decades, the Supreme Court lesson has been clear. Put not your trust in judges to rescue America from the moral stain of abortion.
That's absolutely true. But why does that make it okay to vote for people who are pro-abortion? It doesn't matter. Like, you should be voting for people who are against abortion every single time. Unless you like the idea of people killing babies.
Right now, you might be thinking, but Sky, those justices from the 80s and 90s were too moderate. We still need more serious pro-life people on the Supreme Court, and then things will change. That brings us to the second assumption. Overturning Roe is the key to ending abortion.
No one thought that. No one thinks that. That's just so that states who don't want it don't have to have it.
Politicians talk about Roe v. Wade a lot. Republicans get their voters excited by promising to overturn it.
I've never heard a single Republican talk about overturning Roe v. Wade. I've only ever heard Democrats talking about it's in danger every time a Republican is either elected into office or appointed to the Supreme Court.
And Democrats get their voters fired up by vowing to defend it. You'd think the entire issue of abortion hangs on this one case. But the truth is a lot more complicated than that. Here's what people forget. The Roe decision in 1973 did not legalize abortion, and simply reversing Roe wouldn't make it illegal. For example,
So it took them 4 minutes to get to this.
according to the CDC, in 1972, the year before Roe, there were nearly 600,000 legal abortions in the U.S.
You're telling me people sinned in 1972?
That doesn't account for the thousands of abortions that were unreported or performed by unlicensed doctors. And in those states where abortion was illegal before Roe, it was still way more common than you might think. In Michigan, for example, in 1971 to 72, nearly 30,000 women traveled to New York for an abortion. We might assume that because biblical values were commonplace at America's founding, that abortion must have been illegal and super rare until recently. But actually, it's just the opposite.
No one thought that.
In 1776, abortion was legal everywhere in the United States. In fact, abortion was so widespread in America in the 19th century that one doctor in Missouri said, quote, "The evidence will bear out the assertion that in no age of the world has there been a more reckless disregard for the lives of unborn human beings than in this present age, and among the civilized and professedly Christianized nations of the earth." And that
Wow. People were even sinning in 1874? I thought sin was just a New Age thing.
was in 1874,
Dumb.
nearly 100 years before Roe v. Wade.
So what?
Significant restrictions on abortion.
Just because something is old and something that's been happening for a long time does not necessarily make it good or bad. Just because something is new doesn't make it new, exciting, or good or bad. It just means it's new. It's just because something's been happening for a long time. You know what's been happening for a long time? Sex outside of marriage. Like, off the bat. That's always been, and through the lens of a Christian. Like, if you're not a Christian, so what? I don't care. But, like, I'm speaking to Christians. That is not okay. And it happens today, and it's happened before, and it will continue to happen no matter what you do. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be okay with it. It just means that it happens. And yes, any step that you can do to stop it would be helpful through the eyes of a Christian, and the same thing happens for abortion.
Abortion didn't start appearing in some states until the late 19th and early 20th century. But even after those laws were passed in the 1930s, doctors still performed an estimated 800,000 abortions every year. That's about the same number that's happening today. So the idea that before Roe, abortion was illegal and rare in America is just not true. That false narrative, however, is very useful to both political.
No one said that. The only people who've said that are people who want to make abortion a right. The way they transition into it, it's kind of like how with the LGBTQ plus community, how they were like, oh, we just want civil unions, and then it turned into, now I want marriage. Well, it should be safe, legal, and rare, to now, oh, it's your absolute right to do it whenever you want, even in some cases after the child is born.
Political parties. Republicans act like the country before Roe was a Christian utopia, and Democrats present the pre-Roe America as a hell on earth for women. But neither's entirely true.
You don't say. Neither is entirely true. You're telling me that we weren't in a utopia, or we weren't in a hell place for women either? This man deserves a medal of that is some stellar research. Like, obviously that's not true.
That's also why overturning Roe wouldn't be a decisive win. Instead, we would just return to the state-by-state patchwork of laws that existed before 1973. And just like before 1973, women living in a state without abortion could still cross state lines to see a doctor or just order an abortion-inducing drug over the internet.
Yeah, that's true, but still, if there's anything that you can do to end abortion, then you should be trying to do it.
Which wasn't possible in 1973. According to the study, the most optimistic outcome would be a nationwide reduction of 12%. That's why David French said, quote, even if Roe is overturned, abortion will be mostly unchanged in the U.S., end quote.
Yeah, that is correct. But again, anything that you can do to help. How many likes does this have? Not that many.
But Scott, 12% is still a lot of abortions. That's a lot of babies. If overturning Roe will save even 1%, isn't it worth it?
Yes.
Yes, of course it is. The issue is not whether overturning Roe would help. It would. The issue is what will help the most.
So, he keeps talking about how, for the last 7 minutes, now we're at the halfway mark of the video, talking about how ineffective Roe v. Wade actually is, and then he's like, well, yeah, it would actually be helpful halfway through. Like, what?
Should Christians continue following the same path they've been on for the last 50 years of ignoring every other issue to elect a pro-life president, to appoint pro-life justices, to overturn one case, to maybe someday hopefully reduce abortions by 12%? Or is there a better way to tackle this problem right now that has nothing to do with who's president? Let's look at two states, one red and one blue. Between 2011 and 2014, Texas passed a number of laws restricting abortion. As a result, abortions declined by 28%. That's more than double the reduction if Roe was overturned. Delaware, a blue state, did even better. Between 2014 and 2017, Delaware improved access to health care for its poorest residents. As a result, abortions in that state declined by an encouraging 37%.
Okay, for starters, that is so misleading, it's not even funny. So in Texas, in 2011, there were 73,200 abortions, and in 2017, there were 55,000 abortions. That is a dramatic decrease. You know how many abortions were in Delaware? 2,900. And then the year after that, there was 2,800. A 38% decrease there is not that much at all.
While the politicians have everyone on both sides focused on defending or reversing Roe, we're missing the local and state policies that are actually impacting abortion right now. Roe is a piece of the very complicated pro-life puzzle, but it's just a piece, and not even a very big one.
Also, I'd like to point out that anyone who is in poverty, below the poverty line, or is just old, have access to Medicare and or Medicaid, sometimes both, and Social Security most of the time.
Putting aside Roe and the Supreme Court for a minute, let's talk about the last assumption. Number 3, the policies of Republican presidents reduce abortions and those of Democrats increase them. Okay, this is where we need to...
Okay, so that is a false premise already. If someone is pro-abortion, then they would not have it's just stupid. You can't just say that, well, there just happen to be more cases of abortion this year and more cases in another year, and chalk it up to one thing, like he did with Texas and with with Delaware. Like, you can't just do that. That's absolutely stupid.
Separate rhetoric from reality. If you look at the two parties' platforms, they couldn't be more different on the issue of abortion. The Republican Party is undeniably pro-life, and every Republican presidential candidate has advocated pro-life policies for 40 years. The Republican platform calls for overturning Roe, no public funding of abortions, and defunding Planned Parenthood. The Democratic Party platform is the opposite. It calls for supporting Roe, taxpayer funding of abortions, and the expansion of Planned Parenthood. If you only look at these platforms, everything seems cut and dry. But the data actually shows something much more complicated. The fact is, abortions have fallen under every president, both Republican and Democrat, for 4 decades.
So, what you're saying is that over the last 40 years, they've just been declining. So what was the point of the Texas example and the Delaware example if it's just been declining?
And today, the abortion rate is actually lower than before Roe became law. In other words, electing a Democrat does not increase
just
abortions.
With black people now.
Let's complicate things even more. The abortion rate in America actually fell the most under Barack Obama. On the flip side, in 2019, while Donald Trump was president and the Republicans controlled the Senate, Planned Parenthood, the country's largest abortion provider, broke its record for taxpayer funding. Now, to be clear, I don't think Obama was responsible for reducing abortions during his term, and I don't think Trump was the reason Planned Parenthood broke its public funding record.
So why would he even bring it up?
Like so much about this issue, things are more complicated than that. But this much is clear. The person sitting in the Oval Office is not what matters most when it comes to reducing
I would
abortions.
prefer
Their
someone
Supreme
whose
Court
values
appointments
align with
haven't
mine
mattered.
rather
Their
than
party
someone else.
platforms haven't mattered.
Yes,
and their
it does
rhetoric
matter.
Hasn't mattered.
Their party
So what
platforms
has
absolutely
mattered?
matter if I'm
Why
going to vote for them or
have
not.
abortions been declining steadily since the 1980s? Again, it's complicated, but a big
you don't
factor
know.
is that fewer women are facing unplanned pregnancies.
It's complicated. There are a million factors, but here I'm going to point you to the ones that I want to show you in order to push this agenda so that you can vote for a Democrat without any moral impunity. Or with moral impunity, yeah.
Sexual activity among teens is way down compared to 20 years ago, and more women have access to healthcare and long-lasting contraceptives. Some states have also passed laws requiring a waiting period before an abortion. They've limited public funding and restricted late-term abortions. Others have pushed to make adoption more affordable. All of these have contributed to reducing abortions. None of them required Roe to be overturned, and none of them happened because of the president, the Supreme Court, or anyone else in Washington. So what have we learned? We've learned that despite 11 conservative Republican-appointed justices on the Supreme Court, in the last 50 years, the court has only upheld rather than reversed abortion rights, and that's unlikely to change. And even if the court did overturn Roe, it would have very little impact because abortion was
It would
widely
have
available
a
before
very
Roe,
big
and it would be
impact
after.
in
We've also
the
seen that
states
the
that
president and
are
his
trying to
party
ban
have had
abortion.
no impact on abortion as the rate has steadily fallen under both Republican and Democratic administrations due to local and state efforts that have nothing to do with Washington. Finally, we've learned that there are things to be encouraged about too. Abortion rates have fallen dramatically, and they're still going down. And according to a 2020 Notre Dame study,
Yeah, that is
75% of Americans say abortion should be illegal or only legal under certain circumstances. In other words, there is wide support for common sense limits on abortion. Even more
What do you mean
importantly,
common sense
the
limits?
Notre
The
Dame
common
study found
sense
that
limit
most women,
is
including
illegal.
most pro-choice women, do not want an abortion. That may explain why local and state efforts to reduce abortions are
People
so
who get
effective.
abortions do
Better adoption laws,
want
waiting periods,
an
crisis
abortion
pregnancy centers,
most
churches, and
times.
support groups who are actually on the ground helping women and walking with them through their pregnancies. That's what's making a difference. Regarding the importance of local engagement,
Christians should be
David
doing
French
that
says
too.
this. If you're
Both
pro-life,
can be
the
true.
encouraging reality is those things that matter most, your relationships and your local political community, are the things over which you have the most influence. The things that matter the least, the presidency and national politics, are those things most removed from your daily life.
That would be the case had it not been for expansion of federal institutions. Local politicians have way less power than they would have at any given point in time, and state politicians are trying to take away power from local politicians because their power has been taken away by the federal government. The federal government is only getting bigger. The more you vote Democrat, the bigger that's going to be, the less this statement will become true.
But I've been around the pro-life movement enough to know that we often get this exactly backwards. We're most passionate about the president, yet too many of us are less interested in the crisis pregnancy center down the street. And after researching the ineffectiveness of the president and Supreme Court, a professor of Catholic Studies at DePaul University said this, quote, "The one strategy for reducing abortions that has been proven to work runs through love, not power. Support for women who may not feel able to carry a pregnancy to term. This requires not blind allegiance to a political party, but the promotion of a culture of life." End quote.
So vote Democrat.
There may be good reasons to vote for a Republican candidate for president, but overturning Roe or thinking the president will reduce abortions isn't one of them. Likewise, there are things about
Let me do this first.
the
and then-
Democratic Party platform I still strongly disagree with, including abortion. But the data clearly shows that
So why vote for them if you strongly disagree with them, including abortion? That means that there's other things. Why would you even post this? Progressive Christians care more about being liked than what the Bible says. If there's any chance to reduce it, then you should be doing it. Healthcare is not one of those things. We already have, for those who are struggling, we have Medicare and Medicaid. They have healthcare. I have 5 health insurance. You know how much money I make a year? About $4,000. My mom, a single mom, we have 8 kids in the house, only makes $33,000. We have plenty of health care. It's not that's complete BS. You know, we are well below the poverty line. We are doing just fine. Yeah, there are people who are not doing as good as we are, but that has nothing to do with that. You know, all these people live in Democrat-ran cities that are struggling the most. We just happen to live in the only Republican area and where we live. I'm not gonna tell you where we live, but yeah, it's dumb. Absolutely wasting my time. Well, God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.